So we'll begin. Dee, tell us about Boundless. It's a new service, and you tell us about what you do, and why we need to talk to you about hiring internationally.
Sure, I might put my slides up actually because I cover this in the first few. So I'll pop the slides up, and do please, by all means, I won't be able to see you once I'm sharing my slides, but by all means, please do keep your mic on and interrupt me at any point in time.
Yeah, I'll let you know what questions are coming through.
That's perfect. That's perfect. So really good to be here. Thanks so much to Rose and the Accountant Online team for having me here today. So as Rose mentioned, my name is Dee Coakley. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Boundless. And Boundless is a remote employment platform that allows companies to easily manage international employment and payroll compliance. So just give you a super quick overview of myself before, Rose, I know you asked the question there of why it is that people need to worry about international payroll and HR compliance. And I'll talk about that in a second. But how I came to discover this problem and challenge very much directly myself was I spent 10 years in chief operating officer roles with B2B software companies. Okay. And in those roles, I was always responsible for finance, legal, and HR. So I very much had direct experience of having to solve these problems. And the last company I was with, we had an internationally distributed team. It happened really organically. We were hiring people to be co-located out of our Dublin headquarters, but a lot of those people weren't Irish. And over time, people would start to request moves back to home countries.
Yeah.
Life happens to people.
Yeah.
And they'd be starting families or want to be close to family. And we supported them with that. They were really valued workers. So, and I'll talk a bit more in a minute around specifically what these challenges are, but I realized that handling this as a smaller business was really just too large a task. So I founded Boundless about 2 years ago. So we act as an employer of record, and I'll explain in a few minutes what it is that means. But we help our customers with ensuring that they're compliant with local employment regulations. We enable them to process multi-country payroll. We take care of tax filings, and we take care of processing all of the payments to individuals, tax authorities, benefits providers. So yeah, you were asking me about why it is that people need to worry about these things. And work has changed for all of us. Life has changed so much for all of us in the last 14 months. These were things that were happening before COVID, but I think the big difference is that this was happening a lot in the technology sector before COVID. Software companies, for years, the likes of oil and gas companies and certain non-profit organizations had international distributed teams.
Yeah.
But it's now much more common across other sectors where I'm sure lots of the people listening today are people who never would have dreamt they'd be dealing with these problems. But there are 3 key reasons why companies find themselves supporting multi-country teams, maybe inadvertently.
Yes.
And one is around access to talent. Finding the best people can be a huge challenge. People aren't always where you need them to be. And when you open up to international hiring, you find that even if you're looking for really specific people with very specialist talent, you'll find it more easily. So access to talent is one. And then a lot of companies will have people working as independent contractors, and that can work really well. And I'll talk in a bit more detail about that. But converting those contractors, there are reasons why you might want to convert them to employees. So why this comes about. And then this has become much more common. Like I outlined with my last company, people looking to relocate.
Yeah.
A lot of movement in the last year.
And would that be from ex-Ireland as well? Of course, we hear of people moving out to the Canary Islands to do their jobs.
Yeah. Portugal is by far and away our most popular country. Everybody moves to Portugal. So we've seen a lot of Irish people moving to Portugal, people from the US, people from all over. And then also companies internationally looking to employ people in Portugal. You know, one of our customer companies, the founders are American, and they moved to Ireland in the last year. They're now building a team. They have people across many different countries in Europe. People are moving into Ireland and out of Ireland.
Okay, yes,
So people
okay.
moving are Irish and they're working for international companies. Some of them are not Irish. There's just a whole lot of movement right now, and I think it's going to continue.
Yeah.
Probably don't need to labor this point. You know, we would say that remote work is simply going to become known as work. We're still in a transitionary period.
Yeah, yeah.
Until the dust settles, we don't really know. I spoke on a podcast, an Irish Independent podcast last week, about the Facebook announcement. Facebook have announced that people can work from 7 countries. The reason they have this clear list of 7 countries is that the problems I'm going to talk about today, they need to control this, and they actually have operations in those 7 countries. So they can't have a free-for-all. Some of the big tech companies early in the pandemic made these announcements that I think probably came from the very top, saying people can work from anywhere.
Yeah.
And then the finance departments and legal departments and HR departments said, what have you done? That's simply not possible. And some of them roll back on that. On that suggestion.
So you can guide us in how to do this, because yes, I thought that well, definitely I understand the wider pool of talent, because at Accountant Online we have Irish people working abroad or who like to travel as well. You know, it has opened up a wider talent pool for us. I don't look after their contracts, so I'm not sure how we do it, but I thought it was just as simple as, well, they'll have an Irish company contract and who cares where they live, but that's not really the case. We do have to be concerned about it.
Yeah, and a lot of companies, and you know, you will find very well-educated, really experienced people will have this idea that so long as the contract's clear, what it says in the contract goes.
Yes.
And we do find sometimes, and you know, I think it's great that Accountant Online have decided to talk about this topic today, because I think there's an understanding at Accountant Online that it's a complex area. But we hear from a lot of people where they say, oh, but my accountant told me that this employment agreement is fine.
Yeah. Okay.
But an employment agreement is a legal contract. Your accountant isn't qualified to advise you.
No.
If your accountant is an Irish accountant, they cannot advise you on employment law in France. They don't know anything, presumably, about employment law in France. We do hear from people who say, oh, my accountant told me this is fine.
Okay.
You can write whatever you want on any employment contract. You can write whatever you want on any legal agreement for anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
But the legislation of the country that the individual is based in will take priority. So,
in what circumstance do you, like when you say will take priority, do you mean,
if I'm an Irish company and I have someone working for me who's based in France, if I produce an Irish employment agreement that states that it's under the laws of Ireland, that states that this individual is employed by my Irish company, that agreement, I can employ someone in France through my company. But the person, if they sit in France, it's all about where they sleep, of course. It's about the number of nights in a year they're actually But as long as that person is in France, they're entitled to the protections of the laws of France.
Employment laws of France.
Laws and any of the other laws, you know, as long as they're in France, the laws of France that apply.
So everything like from vacation to sickness benefit, even, I suppose all of the various benefits that a country has legislated for.
How you'd handle terminations. In France, people have the right to disconnect. So they have the right to not be contacted by the company outside of working hours. All of those laws and protections apply to that person in France. And if that person was to up sticks and move to Portugal, they would then be entitled to the protections of Portugal. As an Irish company, you could produce an employment agreement that says that you are complying with the laws of Ireland, but it's
Yeah.
not the paper it's written on, because the Portuguese
Okay.
government would say, or French government would say, well, this person lives here, our law applies.
Okay.
So there's the employment rights before we get to talking about payroll, which is a separate
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
So you don't, most countries have fairly, and every country is wildly different.
Yeah.
People often have an idea that there's some kind of harmonization across Europe because they hear about things like the Working Time Directive.
Yeah.
So they think, oh, we have these common laws across Europe.
Yeah.
We really don't. There are a couple of areas where there are some European directives. Everything else is very much country specific, because when you think about it, these laws have evolved over time since the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
And countries hold these things very dear to their heart.
Of course, like unions and all of that. Okay, I see. And maternity leave.
Yeah,
Okay.
in lots of countries, sectors you'd never imagine have collective bargaining agreements.
Yes.
Where there are agreed minimums that you must pay someone in that sector. So in Ireland, we have minimum wage. It applies across all sectors. Lots of countries, it's broken down by sector. And it applies to sectors, what we would consider to be professionals or knowledge workers, kind of better paid workers. They will, in some countries, still have collective bargaining agreements. It's not just about manual laborers or the sectors that you would expect to be more heavily unionized somewhere like Ireland. So you need to be familiar with what the employment terms are in that country. Now, most countries, it's relatively light what it is that you must include in an employment agreement. So if you employ someone in New York, for example, you won't even have an employment agreement. You'll give them an offer.
Because there's no, so each of the states has separate laws as well, does it?
Every state in the US has very different laws, yes.
Okay.
Like New York, essentially there are no worker protections. Other than discrimination, they're not really protected.
Yeah.
It's hire at will, fire at will. But somewhere like California, it's much closer to kind of European philosophy of employment.
Okay. And what about, now maybe this is getting ahead of what the information you're going to tell us, but what about workers who are perhaps traveling the world and they're going from country to country? Is that common? Do you have that? Yeah.
It is becoming, or has become, more common. It's somewhat common in the tech sector. I'm always reluctant to say it's common.
I know.
The media like us to believe. You look at Instagram, you think everyone's living out.
Hashtag laptop lifestyle. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's not, there's a very small minority of remote work like that.
Yeah.
That's not really what remote work is, simply because it's a very specific window in your life where that appeals and is attractive.
Sure.
And most people reach, it's inevitable that you reach a stage of your life, or you arrive in a place where something
about, you like it and you want to stay. Yeah.
Yeah. And living out of a I mean, I've done it. Living out of a backpack is great fun, but it has a shelf life. So there are lots of people doing this. They're not all younger. There are older people doing it as well.
Yeah.
It is not the norm for remote work.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of the media posts these photos of people sitting with their laptop with their feet in the water at the beach. That's the stereotype of remote work. But there are huge numbers of people. Our own team are spread across 8 countries. Of the 20 of us, there are only 2 that live in the country we're originally from. We're all immigrants, whatever way you want to look. Apart from myself and one of my business partners. One of my business partners is Irish but lives in the Alps in France. But she's there long term. She's been there for about 8 years. She has a home there. She's quite settled there. That type of remote work is very, very common. So what you described, someone moving around and backpacking, that's what will be described as a digital nomad. It is incredibly complex from a legal and tax perspective. We as an employer at Boundless, we don't support that type of.
Really? Okay. It's just too complex to be.
Very complex.
Yeah. Okay.
As an employer, you must have visibility over the immigration status of the individual. You have to make sure they have the appropriate documentation to work from that country.
Oh, really? Okay.
So working, is it a holiday? Is it a working holiday, or are they
Okay.
working out of that country? You have to they could always seek recourse through the employment laws of that country at the point in time that they're there. But of course, if that's not where they're ordinarily resident, if they're tax resident elsewhere, they could also seek, they could have some claim on the employment rights in that country. And then if your HQ country is a third country, that's pretty complicated.
Yeah.
On the tax side, it depends on the nationality of the individual. For example, Americans all have to file their own tax return every year.
Yeah.
Not every country will have a tax treaty with every other country. So if it's a European and they're somewhere in Europe and they're only in these countries for very short periods of time, a few weeks at a time, but they are in Ireland for more than 183 days in that tax year, that's pretty clear. Then they're paying their tax in Ireland, and you
Okay.
can run the payroll through Ireland. But it can get more complicated than that.
Okay.
You could find yourself having some tax obligations in one or some of those other countries. So yeah, can be, the digital nomad thing is complicated until we're at a point where governments collaborate and there's some kind of portal where people can log in and say where they are when, and pay their taxes very easily pro rata across each of those countries. It's going to continue to be complicated. Yeah. I would suspect we're 20 years, maybe more, off being that kind of system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so as a consequence, I mean, that's an outlier, so I shouldn't labor the point, but possibly it isn't you wouldn't encourage employers to employ digital nomads moving from country to country because it can get complex and
there are lots of companies that do it. There are lots of companies. One of our team members worked for a company previously where she was a digital nomad for 3 years. It's not something that we support for our own team at Boundless, and we support it on behalf of our customers. We would say that people need to have a tax residence and they need to be in that country. It needs
all right. Okay. So as a minimum, grant.
Yeah. So something else to bear in mind then, that so we've talked about how as an employer you would need to be familiar with the local employment terms. A really key thing before you employ someone in a country is to find out what's involved in terminating employment in that country. No matter how great things are or how wonderful that person seems, things can go wrong. And terminations work very differently in different countries. In a country like the Netherlands or Germany, you as an employer will have to go before a judge and state why it is that you're terminating. In Germany, the judge might just say, no, you're keeping this person. That can happen. In Netherlands, it used to be more complex, but they brought in new legislation in the last few years that makes it more clear cut, where you usually pay some compensation. And you'll know before you go up in front of a judge, your lawyer will be able to tell you what that compensation would be, but you probably want to be quite clear what the termination rules are. And then that's employment we've talked about, but of course payroll and filing taxes is a key thing. Wherever an individual is tax resident, you as an employer will have an obligation to handle their employment taxes in that country. And as an employer, you will need to pay employer taxes in that country. So in Ireland, we have PRSI. There's an equivalent in most countries. In some countries, there's a menu of 4 or 5 different taxes or contributions that you as an employer will need to pay. They vary hugely. So a company like Denmark, employers pay something like 1.25%. Okay. And you look at a country like Portugal, it's about 25%.
Oh, wow. Okay.
20 times as much. It's 20 times as expensive for you as an employer in terms of employer taxes to employ someone in Portugal versus Denmark. Now, of course, Portugal is a lower cost country, so you might be looking at lower salary rates. But if you have someone moving, for example, if you had someone moving from Ireland to Denmark or Portugal, you'd want to ask that question around what the employer taxes are and statutory payments are before they move. We're kind of in the middle in Ireland. You know, we're
What's
not.
our tax rate here?
I think it's about 11.5%. It's around the 11-12% mark. I can never. UK is around the same. I can never remember exactly which is which. And they do vary between, you know, a few percent up to that kind of 20-30% range. So Ireland's actually not that expensive.
But it can double. So you may think you're getting a great value hire in another country, but the tax may just kind of balance it out. But I imagine in any case, most of the priority is around acquiring talent rather than a low cost employment, I would imagine. But maybe it's both, is it?
So most of our customers will be looking for top talent. And the focus is around the right skills.
Yes.
Wouldn't be super price sensitive, or they wouldn't be targeting certain markets because they're low cost markets.
Yeah.
But depending on the nature of your business, you know, you could be a business operating on very, very tight margins, and perhaps you are more price sensitive around cost of labor, in which case you're probably more likely to be hiring in a lower cost, maybe Southern European country, rather than hiring in Sweden or Norway, for example.
Okay. So what would you say for the people on the call now, or for anybody listening to the recording later, who is thinking of hiring somebody from abroad in the future? What's the first thing that we should think of? What should we think of straight away and do?
So I mean, I would put it in two buckets, because while these things are related, you really need to consider both. First of all, employment. What are the employment terms and regulations of that country?
Yeah.
And on our website, boundlesshq.com, you can access our country guides.
Okay, great. Okay.
We employ now in 16 countries. It will be 35 by the end of this year. And we have detailed information, but it's all distilled down into what actually matters for a foreign employer. If you go Google,
great, perfect.
Yeah, you can look on a country by country basis.
Okay.
So consider, what are the employment rights that you'll need to give the individual, and then secondly, what would the cost of employment be in that country?
Yeah. And would we also then, when we're writing contracts, how would we write a contract that would incorporate the laws of that country?
So when you're considering employing people in other countries, and this is whether you're looking at new hires and considering the recruitment strategy and thinking about where you might find people from, or if you have independent contractors and you want to convert them to employees, or if you have people moving, you have a few different ways that you could take care of this. Okay. The first one, and this is, say, Facebook, for example, they have in-country operations in that list of 7 countries that they've given. You know, they've said that people can move, if they want to move out of Ireland, they can move to, I think it's UK, Spain, Germany. I can't remember the other countries. But that is because they have offices, accountants, lawyers.
Okay, and it makes it, they probably have a legal entity there that makes it less complex. Would it make it less complex?
I mean, for them, you know, they have to do intercompany transfers and transfer legal agreements. So there is admin work for them.
Yeah.
It's you know, it's not super straightforward. Yeah. But it's very clear cut from a legal perspective and from a tax perspective. If someone is moving to that country, they're going to live there, and your country, full operation with all of the expertise, really clear cut. For me, for example, the last company that I was with, when we had people moving to all of these countries, it wasn't practical. We weren't investing in those markets as such. So, you know, if I knew I was going to open a sales office in France and I'm going to hire 30 people there, and Enterprise Ireland are going to give me funding to help me with my international expansion, and I'm investing in the territory, that's very clear cut. I'll hire a lawyer, I'll hire an accountant, I'll put the time into it. And I've done that a number of times for the US, where I've set up sales offices there. But in my case, at my last company, I had an individual moving to France. I had an individual moving to Spain. I just didn't have the energy or resources or budget to establish
set up a local
operation.
Yeah.
So then you can look at registering locally as a foreign employer, which is what I did at the last business I was with. This involves the individuals being employed by, say, your Irish entity, if that's where your HQ is. And that Irish entity registers as an employer in France or Germany or wherever it is. Now, you'll still need to comply with the employment rules of that country. You will still need to pay employer taxes, process payroll in that country. So, you'll still need a lawyer, you'll still need an accountant. It's a little bit quicker and easier than having to establish an entity. And you won't usually have to pay corporation tax in that country, unless people are in sales roles. It's a different matter. So that's what I did at my last role. It was still incredibly slow and painful. It can take up 18 months for some countries just to get your employer number from the tax authorities.
Okay.
It took me about 7 months to get set up for Spain, 8 months for France, but it was a complete pain. And we used third-party intermediaries that were supposed to help.
Okay.
Nightmare. So that was how I came to founding Boundless. And Boundless CEO, a professional employer organization.
Okay.
So we act as an employer of record on our customers' behalf. And I'll talk in a second about what that is. So that's the next option, that you outsource all of this stuff to a PEO like Boundless. There are lots of other companies that do this as well. That company has the infrastructure, they have the expertise, and you don't need to worry about it so much. And you pay them fees to take care of that. Then the lightest touch, easiest, quickest is to have people as independent contractors. And lots of companies do this. And certainly, I've done this lots in the past. It's quick, easy. It is a huge compliance issue in a lot of countries. Lots of governments will say that if someone is really an employee for you, if they're working like an employee, they need to be treated as an employee. So it is the least compliant. So there's a varying scale. And you might find that there are some roles that you have as contractors for limited periods of time, some you put through a PEO, and then there might be some countries where you decide to be a foreign employer. So doing it yourself, whether it's registering the entity or being a foreign employer, I kind of just gave an indication there of the lengths of time that I found. For me as a small business, it doesn't make any sense. I would never again, for a small business, go down that route. It makes absolute sense if you are at a size and scale where you have a legal department, you have a finance team, you have people ops people, and they can figure all of this out. But yeah, much more challenging as a smaller business. So then the employer of record model that we operate, we sign up to a commercial agreement with our customer, the company, and then we enter into a tripartite co-employment agreement between Boundless, the customer company, and the employee. And on that agreement, and it's a different agreement for each country, obviously that agreement is compliant with the local regulations there. It states that Boundless is the legal employer as far as the local government are concerned, for purposes of compliance, processing payroll, filing taxes, and making payments to the individual, to the local tax authorities, to the local benefits providers. And then the company, our customer, is responsible for owning the day-to-day relationship with the worker. We don't get involved in recruitment. Our customers come to us and say, I have this person that I want to. They would allocate work and manage performance. And then from the employee's perspective, their obligations are as with any employee, performing the work to a good standard. Their relationship with Boundless, as far as they're concerned, Boundless is their payroll processor. They get their pay slips through Boundless. And if, for example, they're going for a mortgage and they have to provide proof of employment, you provide that paperwork.
So are they legally employed by the company. So in that country, so say I have an employee over in France, I use Boundless as the intermediary, the employer of record. When they go for a mortgage, we'll say, is the employer Boundless or ourselves?
It's Boundless. So at
Okay.
Boundless, in each of the countries where we support employment, we have all of our own infrastructure. We have the equivalent of a limited company locally. We have the registration with the local tax authorities. We'll have a bank account locally. In many countries, payroll must be paid through a traditional local bank account. You know, you can't be paying from a Revolut account or something like that.
Yeah.
You can't pay from your Irish bank account. It must be a local bank account. You can imagine how much fun it is setting up business bank accounts somewhere like France when you're a foreign company during COVID.
Okay. Okay.
They take time. They like a lot of paperwork. So yeah, we have all of that infrastructure. We're set up to process the payroll and file the taxes. We have relationships with pensions providers and health insurance providers in each country. So we have all of that infrastructure. We establish that once. It takes us a long time. It can take about 1.5 years for each country.
And do you do the contract as well then?
We
do the contract? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So yeah. Mm-hmm. So say I found my perfect candidate and I send out, I perhaps ask you guys to send out a contract on our behalf saying, here, this is all the list of benefits, etc. We want, this is how you'd be paid. Explain that you're our partners. And is there ever any concern really from a personal perspective of those individuals in those countries that they're not officially employed by the company and employed by the employer of record instead? So you get feedback about that?
The employee or worker's perspective varies greatly depending on the stage of their relationship with the company. Yeah. So we would often we get approached a lot by individuals who say, I've just applied for a job with this company. I really want the job. I think they want to employ me, but they don't know how to employ someone in my country.
Yeah, certainly, because we'd be anxious about it. Okay, very good. Yeah.
They'll often say, I've told them I found you. Can you talk to them? And our customer is the company, not the individual, but we get a lot of individuals coming to us. And in that case, the individual is delighted that Boundless exists because the company is often saying, this just isn't possible for us. So that's, the employee's delighted then. Yes. In a case where a company is hiring remotely, internationally, like a Boundless, we're hiring at the moment, and every role we're hiring for, we have the list of 16 countries we employ people in, and we say, we're international remote, we'll hire from any of these countries. And a lot of our customers, when they're hiring, they'll say to people, this is an international remote role. We offer flexibility around where you live. In order to be able to do that, we employ through a PEO. And that in those cases, the individuals, often these, could be a Californian company paying Californian pay rates, and the individual lives in rural Croatia. Oh, really? They're earning 6-8 times the local salary. They're delighted to be employed through Boundless. They don't have a problem. Where it's slightly more sensitive is if an individual has been employed by a company and they have requested a move to another country. They're usually delighted. But if, we've had it in the past where, say, a foreign company acquires a company in a country and they say to workers, you are now going to be employed through a PEO. Those workers will have a lot of questions because we had regular straight up employment through a local company that we were working for. What is this new arrangement? So in those cases, we would talk with the workers and help them to understand.
Okay, great, I understand. And then you have, we have a couple of questions on the locations that you serve. You have 16 countries coming up to 17 next. Is Canada and Norway on that list?
Canada is on there. Norway will be next year. Okay. But yeah, Canada is up and running.
Great. And another question is, do you facilitate the hiring if we've already have someone to hire. So we have somebody, I suppose, facilitate the hiring, meaning you do the contract, etc. So
Absolutely do
yeah,
the contract.
okay,
Yeah. So Boundless takes care of the employment agreements, getting that individual signed up to the employment agreement, making sure it's fully locally compliant. We talk with the customer and find out what employment terms they would like to offer this individual. And all of this is done through our platform. We have a web app. The customer, when they're inputting the employment terms for the individual, the system will only allow them enter terms that are within acceptable
oh, for that
boundaries.
country, oh, excellent, that's great,
So
okay,
if, for example, paid time off, if you were trying to give someone 15 days
yeah,
vacation time in France, it simply wouldn't allow you
okay,
to do
great,
that.
so it's kind of foolproof in that way.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, we provide those employment agreements. We operate from the assumption that our customers know nothing about
Yeah.
employment in this country, and that they don't have any access to any accountants or lawyers in that country, and that anything they need to know, we need to provide that information. Any paperwork that's needed, we need to provide it. So all of the paperwork is provided through our platform.
And something that comes to mind then is this phrase, employer of record, that I haven't heard before. And you mentioned earlier that some people will say, my accountant said this contract was perfect. And we all look to accountants and lawyers and HR people for various pieces of advice. But, I suppose this falls between a few different professions. So just relying on an accountant or relying just on your local HR person often won't be enough, will it? Because this is new territory to a degree.
I can guarantee you that your Irish accountant is in no way qualified to provide you employment law advice for Germany or Italy or Spain. It's actually a really big problem. People come to us and they create all kinds of compliance issues for themselves because they took as gospel perhaps a passing comment that their accountant made. Your accountant, if your accountant is an Irish accountant, they can only advise you on Irish tax and payroll.
Yes.
And they often, the very nature of accounting and law, it's probably unlikely the person has moved around or been chartered in many different countries. But maybe they have, but we don't. We'd be snapping them up as employees if many of these people existed. It's very unusual that you may find operated in 2 territories, possibly not many more. So they don't know what they don't know, and there are all of these, and I've been guilty of this in the past when I worked across fewer countries. Your Irish accountant probably doesn't realize that there's a 14-month payroll in Portugal.
Okay.
You go and your employment
14 months, not just 13 months.
There's 13 months in some countries, but 14 months in a lot of Southern European countries. Everyone gets a bonus
for Christmas,
an extra month's pay in July and Christmas. If you go and talk to a Portuguese accountant, he won't even mention, or she won't even mention that to you, because they think that's the norm everywhere. And that's also a challenge, and I found that as a challenge in the past, using in-country accountants and lawyers in other countries.
You don't know what you don't know.
You're up and running, and something, you notice something in passing 8 months in, and you say, what is this? And they say, well, what do you mean, what is this? And you say, I've never heard of this thing before. Like, there are certain accruals in some countries. For example, holiday pay gets accrued. We talked about it just yesterday in our accounting meeting. I can't remember what country it is, the new country, where we have to accrue holiday pay. So that's a different accounting treatment for us in our group accounts. Not something we come across before. If you don't know to ask, they won't tell you, because they don't know what doesn't happen in other countries.
I understand.
And one of the reasons I founded Boundless is because there is this when it comes to international employment, there's this intersection between HR, law, and finance.
Yes.
And really, before now, there was nobody really qualified to advise on that. And I know I've talked to someone who was previously an accountant at one of the big accounting firms in Ireland, and one of the top firms.
Yeah.
And they said it used to always strike them as strange that a client would say, I'm going to have people in these 4 countries. I need you to advise me on this. And they in the Irish office would receive this spreadsheet, and there'd be a tab for Ireland. And they could see that their colleagues in England, Germany, France, Spain had filled in the other tabs. And they would think, goodness, this spreadsheet is just going to be sent back to the client like this. And the client has to interpret how these countries overlap, or how, if this is an individual moving, you know, what the implications of that are.
Yeah.
Because you have this disjointed 4 individuals in 4 different countries, at 4 different offices, all working under the umbrella of the same accounting firm, but none of those people is qualified to join the links between those countries. And they can just advise on each country as a standalone. So yeah, as an international or cross-border employer, you need to be joining those links, or you need the support from someone that can help you with that.
Okay. So practically speaking then, even a lot of nice questions on here for if we want to take on an employer of record, this is what we should look for. So as we're like looking at across internationally, these are kind of, yes, questions. Will they legally employ your worker? Are they direct employer? Okay.
Yeah, something to bear in mind. So you will hear the terminology PEO and employer.
PEO, okay.
For some reason, PEO rarely gets spelled out, but it stands for Professional Employer Organization.
Okay.
I know I have EOR here on the slide, but that's for the same activity. It tends to get referred to as employer of record.
Okay.
And you will hear the terms PEO and employer of record used interchangeably. If you Google for a definition of these terms, you will find conflicting definitions, because really they're not in the Oxford English Dictionary. They're terms made up by companies, and
perhaps internationally they have different applications and contexts.
PEO, Professional Employer Organization, PEO, is the term that Americans tend to use, and PEO is a really established model there. It's been around since the 60s. There are about 500 PEOs currently operating in the United States. And that is because every state has its own tax regime. I own a pub or a shop in the US. Chances are a few of my employees live across state lines. I then have to comply with the tax regime where they live. So it's completely standard for small businesses to outsource all of this stuff in the United States.
Okay. More locally then, our headquarters is in Donegal, for example. So it's quite usual for there to be cross-border employees, working across those borders. And with Brexit, it may have made things more complex. But as you said, we shouldn't take for granted anyway, just because another country is in Europe or isn't in Europe, that there's harmonization that means we don't need to appreciate those differences. Where whatever border we're going across, we need to consider those local laws.
And I think people did start to panic and worry due to Brexit. The challenges of international employment, if you were an Irish company employing in the UK and across the Northern Irish border, they didn't really change with Brexit. They existed before Brexit. So if someone lived in Northern Ireland across the border and you were employing them in the Republic of Ireland, they were, if they were performing their work in the Republic of Ireland, you would probably be in a good position to have an Irish employment agreement and to apply those terms. But it's the individual, if they're living in the UK, it's a grey area. It's not totally clear.
Is it? Okay.
And then if they're tax resident, if they are sleeping at night in the UK, on the Northern Irish border, their payroll should be processed through Northern Ireland, and they should be paying tax there. That existed before Brexit.
Okay, and then we have a question from Neve who asks, Does Boundless facilitate commissions, equity, or other similar payroll elements through their payroll for these employees?
Really good question. Commissions and bonuses, absolutely. So we can process any kind of pay additional compensation like stipends. We take care of pensions, health insurance, other types of benefits that might be handled via payroll.
Okay.
Share options allocations are a whole other ballgame.
Okay.
It's incredibly complex. I ran a round table on this recently. A number of the people I had at the round table are heads of people ops from a lot of very high profile Silicon Valley tech company. I won't name them because it's always a confidential discussion, but they're companies you would have heard of. Some of those people have held the head of people ops role at, this could be their third or fourth high profile tech company they're doing it at. So they're very experienced individuals. All of them said across the board at every company they've been at, none of those companies are doing it in a compliant way, simply because the infrastructure isn't there right now to be able to do it in a compliant way.
Okay.
And that the tax regulations around employee share options vary so greatly. I've implemented employee share option schemes at a number of companies in the UK and in the Republic of Ireland. The rules are totally different. How those options allocations are treated by the local tax authorities vary hugely. If you are, for example, an Irish company and you're granting share options to individuals across a number of different countries, it's really challenging because there's a really high probability that your options agreement, if it complies with this country, it's going to be in conflict with that country. And it's simply not practical to have an agreement that's unique to each country because you're granting the options in the HQ company.
Yeah.
Macron is the only politician I know of. Macron in France is the only politician that I have heard of talking about this and saying he wants to see some harmonization across Europe. Now, I feel it's a PR exercise, and they've been doing a lot of work to make Paris a tech hub. They've had some great success with that, and I feel part of that campaign. I don't know that there's any great progress being made there. I don't know how soon or early we'll see any changes there. We at Boundless will be hugely supportive of harmonization of tax treatment of options. We will be building out a product to address this. We're working on it. Our first goal is to make our own scheme compliant across all of the countries where we have people. We don't yet know if that's physically possible. I suspect it's simply not. So sorry. A lot of these things, the harmonization of benefits is one people ask about.
Yeah.
There's simply
there's no template for it. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
You just then tweak and try and make it a bit better.
Yes. Okay. And how about then practically speaking, perhaps somebody has been with you for a couple of years, performance has been great, and then perhaps performance may slide and you start to perhaps instigate disciplinary proceedings. When things go wrong, I'm thinking about, and how does Boundless help then, or is there anything that are there local companies that can help you just to make sure that you're compliant with local laws? I'm just noting the question on the commercial terms for termination, and I was thinking, well, you would want to respect the local laws on termination if it came to that, or even redundancy.
Absolutely. So bear in mind, certainly in terms of how our agreements are structured at Boundless, Boundless takes on significant legal risk as the legal employer of the workers. So our goals are very much aligned with our customers. We need our customers to be good employers.
Yeah.
So it's written into our commercial agreement that a customer will come to us as soon as they feel there may be an issue with an employee or there may need to be a termination. We then handhold the customer through that. It is in our interests that the customer has everything that they need to handle this effectively. And it's also hugely important to us that all employees are treated with respect and granted the rights that they are entitled to in that country. So we will give full written guidance on the termination procedure for that country. We will coach the managers or individuals dealing with those conversations if they need that kind of support. And we walk and handhold the customer through that whole process. And we're very much incentivized to do that, because otherwise we could end up in very sticky water. But if you are looking at employer records, that's a question to ask, is how much support do they give at the time?
Long term.
Yeah. But obviously, if there are costs associated with termination, like a redundancy payment or something like that, that cost will be borne by our customer. But Boundless would facilitate all of that, advise on how much that to be, and take care of the payments.
Very good. Okay. So Dee, we're coming up, we just have 9 minutes left. If we've got any questions, more questions from the audience, just put them in the chat. But meanwhile, what, as your kind of, as your parting advice to us, what do you think we should remember from this discussion?
So I think the thing to remember is this is complex. It's incredible, it's challenging, it's difficult, but the upsides can really make it worthwhile. And I personally, I had worked at companies with distributed teams previously, but the individuals that I'd worked with that had been international were mainly software engineers, data scientists. They were working on the product and engineering teams. They didn't work. And I always had my own ops teams co-located with me at the HQ office. But at Boundless, we knew from day one it was going to be a remote first company and that we'd have distributed teams. We knew that the types of skills we needed, we wanted global payroll managers. We were just about to hire a HR compliance person that's Eastern European specific. So we knew we'd have to broaden the net and hire internationally. And I really cannot emphasize how you just look at the quality of candidates. Supply is just a totally different ballgame when you're not just looking within 10 miles of your office. You can be really...
I know, it's wonderful. Isn't it amazing, really? Yeah.
And I will never go back. I will never go back. I actually
to hiring locally.
No, I love being with people. I love the office. I love the operation on a personal level. But it is just so beneficial to our company to have these really amazing skill sets and find the right people. So it's really worthwhile.
It's great for the client as well, isn't it? Because the client gets, in whatever industry you're in, the client gets the best talent rather than, the local talent.
Absolutely. So I would definitely be open to it. I mean, if you are looking to hire, you've nothing to lose by advertising something as remote and seeing what kind of applications you get. And if the best person you find is local to you, or if you're disappointed with what you find by opening it up, you don't need to hire any of those people. You can go back to your local pool, and the next time you advertise a role, just advertise it locally. It's really worth, and anyone I know that has tried broadening the net internationally, they don't go back. It's worth it. And then do remember, it's really complicated. You can get really bogged down in how complicated it is. So it's like researching something medical on Google. You go down these rabbit holes. You'll get flustered. Take a step back. This is really specialist stuff. You should be an expert at running your business.
We'll just call you, Dee, and ask you to resolve it for us. I have to say, when thinking about hiring internationally in the past, that has been, niggling concern, saying, well, I don't know, anything about the local practices there or the local, So we have a couple of questions just before, we have 3 questions before we go, if you can answer really quickly for us. One is, do you do pre-screening of employers before you take on their business? Or what is the onboarding process like?
We do indeed. So pre-screening, as in we have a conversation with people, a Zoom call. We have said no to some companies because we take on a legal risk by working with these companies. Our goals, our values as a company are very much around quality employment. We don't work with companies where they're hourly workers or seasonal workers. these will be ongoing full-time salaried workers.
Yeah.
We do have a minimum cost, which is €350 per employee per month. So it is less likely to work for very low cost kind of roles or
Okay, because that was a question actually about the pricing. So
yeah,
you have a minimum. The question was, are Boundless fees based on an individual's salary?
they are. So we
They
charge
are.
10% of the value of payroll processed, and we have a
So
minimum.
minimum 350, and what was the what was the percentage?
It's 8%.
8%. Okay. And then are there any types of remote employees that present more of a challenge than others? For example, salespeople who have relationships with customers in their local country. That's a very maybe specific question for you, Dee.
The sales one is an interesting one
Okay.
because you open up some additional things you need to deal with if you have salespeople in a country, things that Boundless doesn't deal with. At Boundless, we just deal with employment.
Yeah.
But if you have people selling out of a country, you will need to look at the sales tax situation, which can be really complicated. So VAT, in other words, you need to look at where the sale is being performed, where the customer is based, and then if there are other decision makers or people involved in the sale and they're in a different country, that's also relevant. So you need to speak to, and there are people who advise on international and cross-border VAT. Stripe have just launched a product in this space because it is incredibly complex. If you have people selling out of a country, there is a chance you could be considered by default to have some form of permanent establishment in that country and to have corporation tax obligations. We can't advise on that.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, but that you would need to speak to accountants about that.
Okay. So I can sense this complexity here even before you begin the project. So Dee, thank you so much for introducing us to this topic today. Many of our clients are micro or small businesses and are hiring already remotely or thinking about hiring remotely. So how do they get in touch with you then to ask you any questions? Because I know your team is really open to questions even before onboarding.
We are indeed. I've just shared my screen with you there again. We will answer any questions anyone has, even if you think that Boundless isn't a fit for you. We're always really open to helping people. We learn a lot through those conversations, and often those people come around again months later.
Yes, yeah.
So do feel free to reach out. My email address is there. Twitter or LinkedIn are good places to reach me. And any specific questions you have, you can send to that email address, ask@boundlesshq.com.
Great. Thank you very much, Dee, and best of luck with your business. You're just 2 years in operation now, so may you go from strength to strength.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me, Rose, and thanks a million to everyone for listening.
Thank you to everybody. Bye now.
Bye.
Thank you.